Okay, so here's our blank, and we're going to make cuts starting with this as the reference edge. And you can see I've made a knife mark here at a 1/2 inch in and a 1/2 inch in here. We're going to start with this cut, and then we're going to flip it end for end and do this cut. And then we'll bring it back to this orientation. We'll turn it this way and cut this. We'll put it on that side, cut that. We'll finally cut this side, and we'll should have a perfect hexagon. Okay, so this might look a little messy, but I've marked for the center, and then from there took a plumb line out to the 3 sides that I'm going to attach the aprons to, and these are going to be dovetail slots. So I wanted them in the center, and you can see I've got arrows that indicate the apron that'll be in the center, and these are consistent on both pieces, so the sides all match up. I did clean up the sides with a hand plane. I counted my strokes, and I did 2 on each side, so they should stay regular. So what I'm going to do now is, this is going to be a 3/4 inch apron, and this is 1 inch, so there's going to be 1/8 of an inch on either side, and then I came in from that. I came in 5/16 from each side, and I'm going to make 2 passes with a dovetail bit, and I'll go first time on this side, and then the second time I'll go on this side, and because that'll be a climb cut, I'm going to come from the other side of the router table. You'll see that in a second. And then I've marked each one with the distance for the dovetail. It's 4.5 inches. This piece will be 5 when all is said and done. Okay, so I beveled the edges on the bottom of the apron parts, and if you take a look at the fact that when you run it over the router, when you go this direction you're going with the grain, and when you flip it over and go this direction you're going against the grain. And so this side is rougher. This side you might be able to get away with not even sanding it, but this side is definitely rougher. And if you sand it, you can see the difference. This side gets very smooth very quickly. That's just 220, and this side doesn't. So what I'm going to do is use a scraper. That's the best thing to use to get this smooth. It's actually faster than sandpaper anyway. This is kind of end grain up here, so it takes a little bit more effort. This down here is pretty much long grain. And so you can see the, I think you can see the distance difference there between the sanded and the scraped. Okay, I want to talk real quick about order of operations. So when we made these pieces, the key is to mill them to the right thickness, route your dovetails, do your tenons before you address these surfaces. The reason being is if you take some off these surfaces and then you route your dovetails, if each one of these is slightly different, it's going to end up with different dovetail thicknesses. They're not going to fit. So the best thing to do is leave them rough out of your, not rough, but to your final dimensions before you do any sanding or planing. Do your joinery and then come back and do these surfaces. So I still need to sand these. Obviously showed you this, what I did on this surface so far. Order of operations on the legs. I got the legs all glued up. The key on this is going to be doing your mortises while the piece is still square, so you get good measurements off each side. Don't do any planing on these surfaces yet. We'll mark for the taper on the legs, and I've got these marked down so there's an inch left when we're done. And the key on this is making sure that when the tenon goes into the mortise, that any milling you do like this isn't going to go underneath the material that's in the shoulder of the tenon. In other words, this part right here needs to be covering up a flat space, nothing that's beveled. That won't look good. And the other part is that I want to taper the side from the top, but the back I can't start the taper until below the tenon because of the reason I just mentioned. I don't want anything tapered underneath the part that's supposed to be flat. This one does not fit in here. This is not the tenon that goes in here. That's why it's so loose. So I've got the taper starting about 1/8 of an inch or so, 1/4 inch below the bottom of the tenon shoulder, and that will go down to the bottom to make an inch as well. So it's basically the same taper on 3 sides. When you cut it on the tapering jig, you want to make sure that you cut them in the right order because these two are the same tapers. The distance is the same at the bottom, but the tapers is not. So I'll cut this side, then this side, and then I'll do this side on all 4 of them so they're all consistent, and I only have to move the jig once. I tapered I beveled the top at the chop saw. And again, do this after you've done your mortises so you don't remove this reference face or top edge, so all your mortises are in the correct space. All right, so let's taper these and keep going. Okay, to attach the top, we've got some 1/4 inch walnut, and it's about 8 1/4 inches long, mitered 30 degrees on this end, and then on this end the miter is offset so it doesn't come to a point over the leg. I've got these just taped together so I can position them, and what I'm going to do is line up these center line marks with the center line mark here, and I've got just a rough cut of this center piece. Get that centered and put some double stick tape on the bottom, press it in place, I'll drill the holes. Okay, so I've got all the pieces in place, and I've put some marks about 1/2 inch in. There's about an inch overhang here, and I want to locate the screw holes to attach the top along this line. But this is fairly far out from the center, 7 or 8 inches out from the center, and so these holes need to be elongated. I don't want to elongate them along this line because the top's going to expand this way, so I want a line that is perpendicular this way. So I made a little jig. It's just plywood cut at 60 degrees. I'll use this to measure and mark the top as well. And so when I put it on here, it is perpendicular to the long axis, and I'm just going to line up the edge of the point there and strike a line. So the location of the intersection is arbitrary, but this line, this direction, will give me a reference to make an elongated hole, so the expansion will be accounted for. Along the main axis here, they'll just be regular holes because they're right along the center line. Okay, so I've got my pieces of the top here, and I'm trying to figure out the grain orientation for the best look of the top. And for the most part, either piece, they look the same on both sides. There's no major issues with either side. So I'm going to make my decision based on the grain direction here, and if you can see this, the grain goes this way. Both of them are bark out. This is the bark side, and I'm going to make this decision because I'm going to taper this edge like this, and when I taper it going across the grain, I'll get a nice straight grain look. It's not going to be on the bottom, but it's going to be a nice straight grain look. If I was to orient the grain this way and taper it, the cut would go almost along one of these lines, and you'd get a flat sawn look. So I'm going to put both pieces bark up and make the cut so I get that better presentation. This is the table upside down. The apron's on it. I've marked a center line, and because of this joint right here, it's very easy to line it up. So I've exactly centered it this direction, and I've roughly centered it this direction so I can begin to mark the layout for the sides of the table. So the first thing I did was I took a 1/4 inch shim and marked across here. And then I was going to take the dimension of the back bevel and transfer that around to get the edges of the table. And what I realized is on this side, because the piece of trim here is parallel to the side, it will intersect right around here. But this side, because this is not parallel with this side, if I don't want that bevel to overhang this piece, I have to bring it out farther like this. And so what happens is that creates an off-center or a shifted edge. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is, to make this side more like this side, I'm going to trim this piece from the edge where it intersects the apron straight across, so this side will now be parallel, and then when I put this up to it, we will have an edge that looks approximately like this, and that is more in line with what I'm looking for.